This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie. Go bet with MyBookie. Sign up at mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators, and they will match your deposit 50%. Bet with MyBookie. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Finally, our Florida Gators 41 and the hated Seminoles of Florida State 14. No more 5-game winning streak. That streak is over. No winning season for Florida State. No bowl game for FSU. The Gators outscore FSU 28-7 in the second half. And let's say it again, they go on to win 41-14. Gators overcome some early red zone woes, but it didn't matter, as the Gators are better in pretty much every phase of the game and showed why they are taking back the state. It was a blast after the game, being amongst the players on the field when that clock read all zeros. Right there as they grabbed the flags and waved that orange and blue in Doak Campbell Stadium. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson grabbing a Seminole doll head and raising it to the crowd. I share you plenty of pictures and video of that on social media, on Twitter out there. So you guys want to check that out. It was a whole lot of fun seeing the team have fun in that atmosphere. Seeing those players break the streak and end the season for a change and destroy FSU in the process. End the season on a happy note. 5 years in a row, we know where Florida has lost to Florida State. A couple times after that, go on to Atlanta and lose to Alabama in the SEC championship. But this was all about breaking that streak and sending a message to recruits in the state of Florida and sending a message, also to the nation that, hey, this is not the same Florida Gators team under Dan Mullen. This is not a Will Muschamp team. This is not a Jim McElwain team. This is a team that is putting together a 9-3 season in a rebuilding season, being able to get better as the season goes on and end the season with a dominating 41-14 performance over your hated rival, and one that just really, is marquee in Dan Mullen, marquee in a way to end Dan Mullen's first season. Before we break down the game here, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News for Jacks sports team. If you're a Jaguars fan out there as well, check out Till the Podcast, a new Jaguars podcast from News for Jacks. But catch Gators Breakdown on iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube, Spotify as well. And when using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, and you'll want to follow me on social media if you want to go back and look at the last couple of days of having fun with this Florida win over Florida State. And as I mentioned, all the videos of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson with the Seminole head, and fun poke at FSU with not making the bowl games. You can get a lot of that stuff, as well as, of course, news and my thoughts on Twitter and the Gators Breakdown Twitter at Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook. So here we go. By beating FSU 41-14, that 27-point margin is the third largest win over FSU in this rivalry. Being there also the 2008 wins of 45-14, 45-15 victory in 2008, and a 42-13 win in 1972. But yesterday's 41-14, the third largest win ever. So what contributed to the win? How about 500 yards of offense? Over 500 yards of offense. The third straight game where the Gators have accomplished that. Over 500 yards of offense on your hated rival in a game that you needed to win and send a statement. This offense isn't even where it needs to be as a whole yet. And you leave Doak Campbell Stadium with 536 yards of offense. So when we previewed the game, going back to the game plan I thought we'd see, I was a little surprised to see Florida coming out passing as much as they did, especially in the red zone. The lack of wide receiver screens. But you go back and look at it. That is weaknesses of the Florida State defense, is that secondary. So not really too surprising when you go and look at it. I was discussing with somebody that Mullen may fill out Franks and fill out that FSU secondary early on, since that is the weakness, just to see what he can get there. And if it doesn't go according to plan, we rely on that run game a little bit. And that's kind of what happened. We'll go through and explain the game here. But red zone problems here. In the first half of the passing game, it just wasn't in sync. You had some big plays here and there, but Franks, just couldn't get it done. Once the Gators got close to the end zone, and that was basically the reason for only a 13-7 lead at halftime. The Gators would march down the field, and I thought the play calling relied too much on Franks in the red zone. He dropped back, couldn't go through his progressions, and have to scramble. Some his fault, not all of it. Wide receivers were having trouble separating at times, but also other plays in the first half where receivers were running wide open, and either pressure would cause Franks to scramble or he would just scramble on his own. But in the first quarter, Franks was an okay 6 of 9, 71 yards. Really struggled in the second quarter, 2 of 6 for 62 yards. One of those being a 54-yarder to Trevon Grimes. But in the first half, Franks ended 8 of 15 for 133 yards. But here we go. What a way to bounce back like he has multiple times this year. In the second half for Franks, as he went 8 of 11, 3 touchdowns, all 3 of his touchdowns in the second half here, and 121 yards. Finished the game 16 of 26, 254 yards, all 3 touchdowns, as I mentioned, coming in the second half. Now, look at it. I went back last week and we were previewing this game, and 200 yards was kind of the benchmark. If Franks got over 200 yards and the run game was working like it did, this was going to be an easy Gator victory. And that's pretty much how it played out. And as I said, 16 to 18 completions and over 200 yards would be a good thing for this Florida offense. There it was. 16 completions, 254 yards. And as I mentioned, I thought the run game would pretty much work like it did. And that stat line was key for me, is getting over that 200-yard passing mark with an efficient 16, 18 completions. That's exactly what we got there. So Felipe Franks has thrown at least 3 touchdown passes in 4 games this season, marking the first time since 2008 a Gators quarterback has thrown 3 touchdowns in 4 games within a season. So for all the criticism, some here too, of Felipe Franks, but haven't been as down on him as many out there. For all the criticism, you can look at just the progression. Game 1 to game 12 in a dominating fashion at the end, and Felipe Franks played probably his best game of his career when it's all said and done. And it's just, yes, it's not perfect. And there will eventually be a quarterback. Dan Mullen can work the offense the way he wants it to. For right now, it's Felipe Franks. And for right now, he played good enough to get the Gators to a 9-3 record. And in season 1, we all would have taken this. Yes, you can be frustrated with the things the way have played out this season. But you look at Felipe Franks' numbers. And in August, when he was named starter, you would have taken these numbers. You would have taken a 9-3 record. And somebody would have told you would have beat Florida State, Tennessee, LSU. We all would have taken it. No questions asked. And, we'll look at the season as a whole coming up. Of course, you can't predict a loss to Kentucky, Missouri along the way either with that. But we would have taken these numbers. We would have taken a 9-3 record. And we would have taken the wins versus LSU and FSU with the exact same numbers Felipe Franks has right now. We would have taken it. And so in the end, it's absolutely okay, even if you're not a full Franks supporter, to be happy with what we saw. And look, Franks, he found his groove, and the run game helped open up the passing game. There was some great play calling to open up receivers, especially in the second half. It was really a tale of two halves for the play calling in general to me, and many of you out there as well. You expressed your frustration as I did as well in the first half with just kind of the combination of the play calling and Franks. But we found a way to more of a willingness to stick with the ground game, especially in the third quarter. So coming into the game, It was definitely, as I mentioned earlier, FSU secondary that was the weakness, and Mullen wanted to attack it early. Franks had 9 pass attempts, a couple more that ended up in scrambles compared to 6 combined carries for Pirine and Scarlett in the first quarter. So 9 pass attempts for Franks, Pirine and Scarlett 6 attempts combined in the first quarter. The second quarter, 9 runs between those two backs compared to 6 pass attempts for Franks. So breaking it down even more with Franks, Scarlett, and Pirine. 11 rushes for 31 yards in the first quarter. Couldn't get the run game going early there, especially in the first quarter, as I mentioned. So part of it, I thought, maybe relying too much on Franks and not sticking with the ground game enough. But I do think Mullen was trying to, and we've seen it many a times this year with what Mullen's trying to do early in games, either maybe to get Frank's confidence up early, or either, those are the plays you're given early and you're kind of playing into the defense a little bit because they are stacking the box. You got your, your receivers in one-on-one matchups against FSU too. A lot of cushion given up by these FSU DBs. So that's why I was really surprised with the lack of screens, because almost every time Florida would line up in the 3 receiver, bunch formation on either side of the field, those FSU DBs were playing back, and sometimes you even had numbers where only 2 guys were anywhere close with 3 receivers. You could definitely would have blocked, 2-on-2 with one receiver, and that one receiver catching the pass and be able to, make a move and get down the field. But when all said and done, in the first quarter, it was 11 rushes for 31 yards between Frank, Scarlett, Pirine, and then in the second quarter, 12 rushes for 100 yards, 8.3 yards per carry. And that was aided by Pirine's 74-yard touchdown run. So besides that big run, Florida was definitely having trouble running the ball, and tried to let Franks control the game early on. Then you move to the third quarter, and as I mentioned, this is when Florida kind of really just stuck with the run game, especially coming out after halftime. I'll look at that. But as a whole, in the third quarter, 17 rushes for 86 yards, 5 yards per carry. And then also in the fourth quarter, 12 rushes, 65 yards, 5.4 yards per carry there. So you could tell Florida was wanting to run the ball after halftime. I think to help open up that offense and help Franks a little bit more. Their first drive right after halftime, the very first drive, Florida got the ball first, 6 straight run plays after halftime. 9 of the 12 plays in that drive were runs. So I think it was a way to help Franks, getting that ground game open and opening up the passing game. You saw it did open up that passing game for some big plays. Later in the third quarter, when Florida kind of started separating themselves. When it was all said and done, Florida rushed for 200 plus yards for the 8th time this year, matching the combined total from the entire Jim McElwain era, 2015 to 2017. Rushed for 200 plus yards for the 8th time this year. 8 times in one season, matching the entire Jim McElwain era. That doesn't say something. I don't know what will. Dan Mullen has come in and found a way to get something out of this offense with this almost same exact players as the previous coaching staff. So, while the passing game, looked clunky early on, we always talk about here and we went back to it. I remember doing a podcast earlier, not long after Dan Mullen was hired, about the importance of big plays. And look, that's in any offense, of course. But when you have an offense like Florida, that's probably going to be a little clunky when you're trying to figure things out in year one. Hey, if you can get big plays, then that can really help the offense. And it played an important role in this game and how much they could help the offense. And, look, we already mentioned the biggest one, Pirine's 74-yard run. But big gains helped and got Florida in position 4 points. And some of them led directly to points with some of the touchdowns. So some of the big plays in this game, Van Jefferson, 39-yard reception in the first quarter, led to the 27-yard field goal. And so with that pass to Jefferson, Franks passed John Brentley for the highest season passing yardage total by a Gator since Tim Tebow threw for 2,895 yards over 14 games in 2009. So, Franks setting himself in recent record books there. So other big plays, of course, the Michael Pirine 74-yard touchdown run in the second quarter. Longest rushing play of the 2018 season. longest rushing play this year. So it was Florida's first 70-plus rushing touchdown since Jeff Driscoll's 70-yard run against Vanderbilt back in 2012. It was also the longest touchdown run by a Gator since Trey Burton's 80-yard touchdown run against Tennessee in 2012. So other big plays in this game: Trevon Grimes, 54-yard reception in the second quarter, his longest reception of his career. Trevon Grimes, 22-yard touchdown reception in the third quarter. That was set up by another big play on defense after that fumble recovery there. So way to respond after a turnover. You score 22-yard touchdown reception for Trevon Grimes. Van Jefferson, 38-yard touchdown reception in the third quarter. Trevon Grimes, a 20-yard reception in the fourth quarter, and Jordan Scarlett had an 18-yard rush in the fourth quarter. Not a lot of big rushing yardage besides the P. Ryan touchdown and the 18-yard run from Scarlett there. But dominating in the trenches as well with the offensive line. I mean, kudos to those guys. Much maligned coming into this season. Probably the one position group, besides quarterback, that we had the biggest questions about, just because of what we saw before, not being a reliable group. Pretty reliable as far as this year. Didn't give up a ton of sacks all season long, and really helped. I mean, look at the rushing stats that we've mentioned earlier this episode for the season stats, and 8 games over 200 yards. And that's not just the running backs. I mean, as much as we want to praise Pearson and Scarlett and P. Ryan, it starts up front. And it starts with that offensive line who, for all their faults that we thought we had coming in, kudos to John Hevesy and that group for, finding something to work with. Of course, going back to early in the season and after the Kentucky game, and we questioned, the mental aspect of this team, especially in the trenches, and what a way to respond, for those guys. And, mostly, most of the same starting five all year. So kudos to those guys and big time performance from them to end the season as well. Going back to those big plays, notice there were 2 names that had the best games of their season as well versus Florida State: Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes. Trevon Grimes, 5 catches, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, a 54-yard reception. Van Jefferson, 4 catches, 92 yards, 1 touchdown, a 39-yard long reception here. So for Grimes, here he entered the Florida State game with career highs of 4 receptions and 54 yards with only 1 touchdown. So here we go, 5 catches, 118 yards, and a touchdown versus FSU. So coming in, only 4 receptions, 54 yards, and 1 touchdown, and played the best game of his season by far with 5 catches, 118 yards. And 1 touchdown versus Florida State. So with all that said, this was the Gators' best performance of the season, given the opponent and given the circumstances of this game. Now, this was a game with the opportunity to send a message, to step on the throat of FSU, and to take back the state with an offensive performance like this was the perfect message to the recruits, to current players. Look, believe in us. This is what we do. May have started slow again, but and that's another thing to speak to this current team is how many times they go in that locker room and in the second half, just pour it on, and that speaks of the buy-in once again of these current players and trusting that these coaches are going to put them in the right situation and not no frustration and just kind of sticking to a plan and coming out with a victory. It's not even close to where it'll be when Mullen gets his guys in, and was still good enough to put up 41 points on the board and signal better things are to come for these Gators. And we move to the other side of the ball. That leads to some of the frustration that we saw in the first half with the offense, because the Florida defense gave every opportunity to the offense to get up fast and get up early. The defense started the game by forcing 5 3-and-outs on the first 6 Florida State possessions, and 7 out of the first 10 were 3-and-outs, and one of those were a 4-and-out for the Florida State offense. Also, the third drive of the game wasn't a 3-and-out. The 2 third downs were converted by Florida penalties, not necessarily FSU converting them on offense. Florida aided them with penalties. So by the time the game ended, Florida State was 1 of 14 on third down. And look, we all know where it starts. Started with that pass rush. Ja'Kai Polite, Jabari Zuniga harassed DeAndre Francois all game long. And Polite entered the game tied for third in college football in forced fumbles, became the 8th Gator in the first since Marcus May in 2015. So 8th Gator in history to log 5 forced fumbles in a season. Polite's 2.5 sacks versus Florida State gives him 11 sacks on the season, tying Derek Harvey in 2006, Clifford Charlton in 1986, Alonzo Johnson in 1984, and Wilbur Marshall in 1981 for the highest single season total in school history. 11 sacks there, tying all those greats for 5th highest in school history in a single season. The Gators had 5 sacks for the game, and it was, it really affected the entire FSU offense to the tune of only 293 yards of offense. How many times in this 5-game winning streak was it the Florida offense the butt of the jokes? Well, not even close on this one. 293 yards for FSU. Reversal of fortunes for the two teams here. Francois only 14 of 29 with 2 interceptions and 154 yards. 35 rush attempts for the Seminoles for only 158 yards. Tamorian Terry, Naquan Murray, only a combined 6 catches. So good job that Florida defensive backfield. Good job, Christopher Henderson. I don't think a pass was caught on him all day there. This was one of those mid-season performances we saw from the Gators defense. They did exactly what they were supposed to do against an offensive line they should be able to take advantage of, and they did. They kept the big plays from happening that we've seen lately, especially early. Yes, there was a couple there. It's going to happen. I mean, it's football. You're still playing, a team that has some talent there. You're going to give up some plays every now and then, but good because of what we saw against the big time. Not counting Idaho, against the FBS opponents. Since the bye week there, heck, even going back to the Vanderbilt game of slow starts and the opponent being able to take advantage of what the Gator defense was doing, especially early on. So Georgia did it, Missouri did it, South Carolina did it, and then you get your rivalry game, and FSU wasn't able to take advantage of it the way those other teams were. So good fast start by the defense. Give the offense every opportunity early on to really stretch this game. And hey, look, it all worked out in the end. Of course, nothing to complain about when it was all said and done. When that clock read 0. So I tell you what, discussed it before. What a big win for Dan Mullen. Remember, guys, 1 year ago on this Sunday after the Florida State game, we got word Dan Mullen was going to be the next Florida head coach. So looking almost exactly a year ago, after the McElwain fiasco, the Chip Kelly dance, it was Dan Mullen that was hired to be the next Florida Gator head coach the Sunday after the Florida State game. 1 year later, stops a 5-game skid to FSU with a 41-14 dominating performance. Going back, he was my first choice all along. I think we see why he was absolutely the right man for the job. And what he's done in just 1 year, excited the fan base coming into the season. You beat the majority of your rivals on the schedule. You got Tennessee, LSU. I know, dropped one to Georgia, but now Georgia's the better team right now. No shame, no problem in admitting that. And you dominate Florida State at the end of the season when you absolutely needed to and had to. Wins over Tennessee, wins over LSU, wins over FSU. In year 1, you end the season 9-3. You go back and look at it, you won a game you weren't supposed to win in Starkville when all the emotions were riding high of Dan Mullen returning to his old school, and you walk out of there with a victory many people think you had no business of winning. When it was all said and done, you're 9-3. Florida had every bit the right way of winning that game. Going back and looking at it, in this first season, the offensive progression from Dan Mullen, the improvement on defense from Todd Grantham, a little bit of a lull there, but all said and done, you look at what this team was able to accomplish after the 4-7 season and not knowing, what you were getting in the transformation, in the transition of Dan Mullen coming in. Look, yes, going back to Felipe Franks, is it perfect? No. But Dan Mullen fixed him in a way where this offense is absolutely functional. It relies on the run game the way it should. Over 200 yards rushing in 8 of 12 games this year. And look, Frank's not really a liability like he was in the last offense. The offensive line, not really a liability like it was in the offense. We've seen Josh Hammond, Freddie Swain, guys who really couldn't put it together under the last offense, make some plays this season, being able to turn their career around. You had Martez Ivy, who not necessarily lived up to his 5-star billing along the offensive line. I've talked about that group, but somebody like him in particular being able to fix their career. CeCe Jefferson going out a winner. Those two guys coming back and being a part of this team. What Dan Mullen was able to do mentally, physically, game planning, on the field coaching. I mean, look, Florida's in good hands. And it was 1 year ago. Well, got word he was going to be the next Florida Gator head coach. I don't think many of us saw 1 year later, the Sunday after the Florida State game, we'd be talking about a 41-14 victory over those hated Seminoles. So let's get to your tweets and reactions from the big victory. A lot of us, including me, having a lot of fun out there on social media. So, of course, I wanted to get your thoughts. I knew most of them anyway, but, of course, kind of just focus it in here on this episode to get your reaction. But before we do, whether you're an expert or rookie, you should be sports betting at MyBookie. There's so much to bet on. College football, one more week of that with the championship season. Bowl games coming up as well. College basketball in full force now. NBA, NHL, NFL, custom props, and you can even bet on esports. MyBookie has been in the business for years. They got great online reviews, and their mobile site is easy to use. Sign up now, and MyBookie will give you a 50% deposit bonus to jumpstart your bankroll. It's a great way to bank even more money when you win. You get a 50% initial deposit bonus. Also, make sure you follow MyBookie at BetMyBookie on Twitter or Instagram. They personally respond to every mention and DM, not to mention that they've given away nearly $10,000 in free money to their followers this football season. And you'll be the first to know as soon as new odds and props are posted. So log on to MyBookie, use promo code Gators, and get your 50% initial deposit bonus. That's promo code Gators at mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid with MyBookie. So, of course, going back to ask you guys to send in your reactions to the big victory. And let's get it started with TK at Tailgater196. Feels like order has been restored. I know there is a long way to get back to winning championships, but Dan has us going in the right direction. Absolutely, absolutely there. Of course, with the season over, we'll enjoy this FSU victory for another episode or two here on Gators Breakdown, but the world of recruiting will rear its head. Big time Naquan Wright commit right after the Florida State game. Many people I trust talked to a high school coach actually last week. So Wright wasn't even committed to Florida State. And he brought up Wright out of the blue and asked me, what I thought about Florida's interest in him. I told him it was high, all that good stuff as a local coach here in Jacksonville. So he says, yeah. And he brought up Wright out of the blue, saying how much he really liked him as a running back. Probably, he put him up there. Even said, now I'm not saying this, not my opinion. Even said he liked Wright more than he did Trey Sanders when it was all said and done. So we'll see how it works out when it's all said and done. That's coming from a local high school coach, big time program here in Jacksonville there. So I'll leave it at that. It's a big time commit there for the Gators. But big victory over FSU, and talking about long way to get back to winning championships. Start some recruiting. I think we've seen what Dan Mullen can do on the field. Let's go get some elites. And this program's heading in the right direction for sure. Definitely on the sidelines there with Dan Mullen. Dustin Woolbright says, great win. Perfect finishing piece that solidified a very successful first season for Mullen. Yeah, and Dan Mullen was asked by Mike Bianchi. We were in the press room after the Florida State game, and asked if this season lived up to his expectations, and Mullen kind of quipped and responded, "Well, I have high expectations." But Dan Mullen made sure to point out he's absolutely happy with the way this season played out. Absolutely happy with the way the guys played, and how could he not be? How could we not be as fans of this program to see where it has come from in just 1 year under Dan Mullen? Kind of going back to my piece earlier about him being hired just 1 year ago. Yeah, we absolutely have to be happy with what we saw from Dan Mullen, and definitely can call this season a success, especially with the way it ended with a dominating win over FSU. Gator Cowboy fan, he goes, other than the first half red zone issues and 2 defensive series lapses, we owned the game. Didn't give FSU turnovers or short fields. A sweet victory. Time to hit the trail. Yeah, we went back to the red zone issues. Yeah, like I said, more frustrating than anything because you saw Florida could go out and just dominate this game. So that was part of it. They relied on Felipe Franks a lot. He left the pocket, couldn't find open receivers when they were there. Sometimes the pressure got too much for him from the offensive line, and the FSU defensive front was pretty good early on in this game, giving Franks some problems as well. So with all said and done, definitely worked out. I'm not going to harp on the negative there too much. Good friend at Sean Hankins. Great win to end the regular season against our in-state rival. Florida's staff had the boys ready, and it showed by dominating them in every phase of the game. Should lead to a few flips to the good guys and propel us to finish within the top 10 in recruiting. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Quayshawn Fuller out there, Derek Hunter, of course, 2 FSU commits that of course, we're watching the game. I think Fuller was there up close, got to see it in person, and I think he had a tweet up there that just said ... So we'll see where that goes. And also having the boys ready to play. Absolutely, this was another game. Florida didn't score a touchdown in the first quarter, but lo and behold, 9-3 with that happening. So not counting the Idaho game last week. We'll count SEC, we'll count Power 5 opponents here. Florida still hasn't scored an offensive touchdown since the Tennessee game. Doesn't matter. I think we saw it as much as that stat speaks to slow starts, it doesn't speak to this team. I mean, you had those slow starts and you're still 9-3. That didn't necessarily cost you. Maybe cost you some in the Georgia game. You could have hit that flea flicker, and maybe that's a more of a closer game when it's all said and done late in the fourth quarter. But I saw water in the bridge right now. The slow starts didn't necessarily lead to much, but they were ready to play. You could just tell they were moving the ball. Wasn't necessarily a disappointing performance at all by the offense, just accepting the red zone. And then the defense, as I mentioned, there's 3 and outs early on. They came ready to play. They came out firing. And you pretty much put doubt in FSU's head from the get-go. Jay Rosario 521 says, unadulterated joy, woke up and still wanted to light a cigar. So this is a fun time to celebrate. No lighting cigars for me, just sharing memes like crazy on Twitter. So having some fun with this one, of course. Waited a long time, Gator fans. Mike Honcho at M. Johns 404. Man, it feels great to beat FSU, not only to beat them, but dominate them. Great game for the entire team. Franks played himself a game. He's taken a lot of stuff from us as fans, but he deserves a lot of credit too. Yeah, and that's what I go back and talking about Franks early on. And he's going to have his detractors. He's going to have his detractors where, look, he can't do enough to please them. But when it's all said and done, Felipe Franks was the best quarterback on the roster. Pretty much showed he's the best quarterback on the roster, in my opinion. That doesn't mean he'll be the best quarterback on the roster in 2019. But for what Dan Mullen was asking to do with this offense, and look, why can't Felipe Franks get better as well with another offseason? So I don't think it's so quick to cast him aside and say he won't be the starter next season. But we'll let it play out. There will be a quarterback competition, I think. But for right now, what we're looking at in 2018, 9-3 record, led the team with that 9-3 record, improved himself, improved his stats as well. He absolutely deserves a lot of credit. At HWY20 Gator, talked to him a lot this week on Twitter, and he was worried about this FSU game, and he even admits it right here. He goes, I doubted the team, the coaching, and the program as a whole. I didn't think we could get the win. As of yesterday, my entire outlook has changed. We are a few classes away from being who UF was, but we're definitely on the way back to national relevance. And that was another thing with this FSU game. There were a few out there who just kind of had to see it first, and that's how I was coming into the season. As the season played out, this was a game Florida should win. I shared a tweet earlier this week, and I apologize for whoever sent it. I forgot, but it was to the effect of, if FSU was any other team in the ACC or anybody with the similar resume, if they didn't have FSU, if they didn't have that spear on their helmet, we wouldn't be worried about the game in general. It was just because it was FSU of why there was a little worry. Because it was a rivalry game, there was a little worry. But given FSU's resume and how they played all year, and Will and I but you go back to last week's episode, and we just announced those putrid stats that FSU had coming into this game. If Florida played their game, which they did, that was the type of performance we were going to get. And kind of almost played out like I thought it would. I said it'd be a close game in the third quarter. I didn't think Florida would have the chances they did early on to almost put the game away, but had to settle for some field goals there instead of putting the ball in the end zone. I thought Florida would eventually pull away mid-third quarter, fourth quarter. They kind of did in a way, but a little different fashion than I thought there. But dominating fashion. I think I had the score of 30-17, all said and done, 41-14 for the Gators. Scott Sweat 1010 says, loved it. I've been waiting for a win like this, and this proves without a doubt we've got the right coach and the best in the East. Give Mullen Georgia's roster, and he wins a championship right now. All we need are players to recruit. There it is. I mean, I look, you guys know I'm a stars matter guy, but I also have always admitted you got to have the coach too. We got one part of the equation. Come on, let's go get the other part of the equation, and I think we all can see the potential this Florida Gator team has. As Stephen Ohl, biggest takeaway for me is how good we should feel going into the offseason. Last 3 games, we've gone over 500 yards with 3 wins and have a chance to win a New Year's 6 game versus the last 3 seasons we've ended the year so badly. There are some real good reasons for optimism. Absolutely. I said so many in this episode, and it starts with having the right coach, and that's why we all should feel optimistic. There's a lot of reasons I think we felt optimistic going into the season as well, but exceeded expectations in year 1, and that's why optimism should be high for the Gators going into that first game of next season when Florida meets Miami and Orlando. I think Gator fans will be jacked up for that game. Brandon Cisneros checks in a lot here. I grew up in a house divided, and from 2013 to 2017, I had to wear the same thing. But yesterday was glorious. Our Gators won with some swagger. We ain't back, but we could be next year. I'll try and get through a few more here. Clint Lawrence, dominance, Dave. Other than a couple breakdowns, dominance. Let's see. Josh Bingham says, at Gatorman 64, I still had PTSD from the Muschamp Mac eras and really thought FSU would make this a ball game. I finally feel like we have a coach that not only understands offense, but how to build a championship team. Bradley Wentworth, it's obvious that Coach Mullen is coaching circles around previous staff and Taggart. Just wait till he gets a couple recruiting classes under his belt. This has been a fun year going by way too quickly. Yeah, Bradley, absolutely. Mullen showed in just 1 year the separation of Florida and Florida State right now. And don't get me wrong, I do think Florida State is better than what they showed this year. But Willie Taggart really, and we heard all year about, Jimbo left such a mess. He didn't leave that big of a mess. He didn't leave a 5-7 mess. Taggart, it took him a little while to realize and trying to change some things, probably too little too late for this FSU team. DeAndre Francois, not necessarily the best quarterback for him in the system. Probably could be better if he stuck to if he ran the ball a little more, trusted himself in running the ball a little bit more. Also some more design runs. as well. Talking to James Coleman, saw him in the press box last week. The one touchdown drive where DeAndre Francois ran like crazy. He goes, "Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about." Francois, and when he gave kudos to Franks in our preview of being a willing runner, he was trying to. That's kind of the point he was trying to make for Francois as well. You have to be a willing runner, and that's part of the disappointment for Florida State this year. So yeah, it was just you could definitely tell the coaching acumen difference of a Dan Mullen being able to come in, take over this team, 4-7, lead them to a New Year's Six game, and FSU struggled last season under Jimbo Fisher, and Willie Taggart coming in and taking the offense in an opposite direction and not being able to improve the team whatsoever from the previous staff. So, does it play out this way for years to come? Off to a good start for Dan Mullen. Does this game change recruits' minds? It's going to change a few or a couple to a few, 2-3 recruits, maybe. As I mentioned, Fuller, Hunter there. Do some of the other commits go to other schools and not necessarily Florida when it's all said and done? So, this game could be a really dagger to FSU when it's all said and done. So that's why you have to go win this game. It sets up so many things for Florida to trend up and FSU to trend down. Justin Wood, it's the kind of win I expected. I expected the Gators to dominate the Noles. I am surprised it took a half for the Gators to start dominating. I think it's great. I think it's a great building block for next season. Yeah, going back to the game, as I mentioned, if this was another team with FSU's resume, we wouldn't have been as worried. So that when the Gators, looking at the team they were playing, yes, it should have been a team they beat. In certain areas, a team they should dominate, especially when you look at what Florida has done in the defensive trenches at points this year and what the FSU offensive line has done in points this year. And what played out was that Florida defensive front just completely dominating that FSU offensive line all game long. All right, a couple more thoughts here before we move on. Zachary Garner, 44. The season is over. We've exceeded expectations. It hasn't felt this good to be a Gator since 2012, and even then it was tempered with the realization that offense wasn't improving. Now we're moving forward and have a chance to build going into recruiting. So come on down, guys. And let's see, Messenger Music. We see the importance of coaching and culture during the game. FSU looked like they practiced dancing more than football. That team has very little football awareness. Meanwhile, Gators played a complete game. Couple things there. Coaching and culture. Look, Kodak Black was on the sideline there. I'm there walking on the field with about 4 minutes left in the game, and see Kodak Black on the sideline and the players interacting with him. And just to see, you don't think that caught with some recruits' mind of seeing somebody they can relate to on that sideline, music they listen to. It did. And Florida's got a little bit of swag back under Dan Mullen, the Jordan brand stuff, Kodak Black talking about the Gators on social media. And that it shifted to the players a little bit. And you go back and look at those videos of Chauncey Gardner along with the fans holding up that Seminole doll head. Look, it's payback for all the stuff FSU's done with the Gator head after the games and stuff the last 5 years and all that stuff. So there is a culture change with this team, and talking about coaching and kind of where the point FSU looked like they practiced more dancing than football. There was a point in that game where Florida State only had 10 guys on offense, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson looked kind of confused because, look, he's expecting 11 players on the field, and he's looking at the FSU sideline there kind of, hey, look, you only have 10 guys on the field. The play goes on to be a deep incompletion for Florida State. But, I mean, look at all the penalties, all the motion penalties, all the 10 guys on the field. I mean, FSU was a terribly penalized coming into this game, and it showed once again. And that's one of the go back and just look at the coaching aspect between these two teams right now. A few more. Here we go. It's Sean Jordan. They dominated in the trenches and showed they're willing to take calculated risk on fourth down. Didn't love all the red zone or fourth down play calls, but that will improve. UF is the best team in Florida, and they get better on the field and in recruiting. I'm glad we have Mullen. Josh Horton, not many negatives, mostly all positive. After 12 games, though, I really expected Joseph to understand his assignments by now. Safety play is still suspect. Good problem brewing for 19, though, with Marco back, add in Dean and Bernie, and you have a solid secondary outside of safety. Yeah, they'll work on those things. Of course, coming up, spring ball, bowl. You've got 15 bowl practices now to work on things like that there. So here we go. Gator 03, Donald Limpscomb. Business is booming in the Ville. It's fun to be filled with hope and riding a winning streak into the postseason for once instead of trending downward going into bowls. Excited to see what the staff can do with this momentum on the trail. And they'll be hitting the trail really, really soon this week. And you'll know they'll be out there in homes of recruits right now. Here we go. Took your backpack at Mike Earl 321. Big win. UF got the right guy. If Willie T doesn't like celebrations by opposing teams, he should try winning instead of whining. Dan has Franks in this team playing with confidence and heart. Refreshing to see. Try and get a few more here. If boring you with some of these tweets, sorry, but a lot of you guys excited. Kind of the last time we get to do this after a game besides the bowl game. So I'm going to get some of you guys there some good thoughts here. It was an overall solid win for the program. Star for a win against FSU. I'll look for things to build upon for next year. And to me, the most important is recruiting. This game was seen as vital for recruiting. I want to see positive momentum here. Lord Heller, some good thoughts on Franks here. Franks looked good, but knowing you have time is huge for a quarterback. That scramble where he hit Grimes on a comeback touchdown, he had all day to throw. In fact, the one sack he took was a covered sack. Hats off to Franks taking advantage of his offensive line, but the Hogs up front dominated. Last couple ones here. Every time we count Franks out, call him to get benched. He responds and balls out. Much respect to him. As a team, we did what you were supposed to do to bad teams. We would have beaten them worse except for the first half of red zone issues, basking in the glow of a successful year. And Luis Besson, La Plata, Granada. The first overwhelming impression has to be how well Felipe Franks played. His entire game was on the money, playing with great confidence, both throwing and running / bulldozing. As in the Spurrier days, his passing set up the run. He owned the second half. Yeah, so very good for Felipe Franks and performance for him for heading out this 2018 season and getting that 41-14 victory over Florida State. So let's wrap up this with scores of interest from around the SEC. Florida 41, Florida State 14, the Gators 41, the Seminoles 14, the University of Florida 41, Florida State University 14, the Orange and Blue 41, the Garnet and Gold 14. One more, the school in Gainesville 41, the school in Tallahassee 14. Okay, yeah. We'll be more serious here. So let's take a look around the last week of the 2018 season. Oh man, flew by. Some good games in the SEC here for this week, and a lot of just some drama for that in the SEC. The last SEC game of the year. We'll get to that in a second, but let's go back to Thursday. Mississippi State beat Ole Miss 35-3. Arkansas loses to Missouri 38-0. That game was on Friday. And then Georgia dominates Georgia Tech 45-21. Jake Fromm went very efficient in that game. Only 175 yards, but I think only 3 completions or 4 incompletions. So crazy there. Iron Bowl was close at halftime. Alabama eventually pulls away 52-21 over Auburn. Vanderbilt puts it on Tennessee 38-13. Kyle Shermer 367 yards passing. And man, Tennessee, remember all that talk a couple weeks ago? Jeremy Pruitt, SEC Coach of the Year? Nope. Clemson 56-35 over South Carolina. That game was close at halftime as well. South Carolina was only down 7 at halftime before Clemson pulls away 56-35. No surprise, Kentucky over Louisville 56-10. And in the last SEC game of the season, 7 overtimes. And Texas A&M beats LSU 74-72. I mean, that was a heck of a game. I stayed up for every bit of it after coming back from Tallahassee, and it was a lot of fun to see 7 overtime game out there between Texas A&M and LSU. That gives LSU their third loss of the season as well. So it'll be interesting to see where they are at in the next rankings compared to Florida as well. Florida has to head-to-head over them. LSU still with pretty good resume. Would win over Georgia, losses to Texas A&M, Alabama, and Florida there. So it will be interesting to kind of see how it all shakes out when the rankings come out there. Between Florida, LSU, because people were wondering about how the bowl game will figure out with the New Year's Six, and that I don't think it mattered too much what happened to LSU if Florida was getting a New Year's Six bowl game or not. So I don't think too much worried there when it was all said and done for LSU falling to Texas A&M. So yeah, there we go, 41-14. Hey, that score holds a special place in our heart for the 2006 national championship win over Ohio State. Also, another one when we stopped the streak versus FSU. It's 41-14 Gators over the Seminoles. So, man, last recap of the regular season here. All 12 games here. Thanks for a lot of you for joining me every Sunday in this live in our instant kind of reaction episodes. Some of you catch the podcast version as well on Sunday or the day after on Monday. Thanks to everybody for all the trust in us this season and big time episodes and guests we've had from Reese Davis and from Game Day and Peter Burns from SEC Network, Chris Doring and Ben Troop and all the guests who have joined me from all the opponent previews this past week, James Coleman, and for previewing FSU and all the beat writers and all that good stuff out there who covered the other teams are joining me here and previewing the teams only like they can. So big time thanks to everybody out there for all the listens, all the interaction, and all the info they can provide out there for Gators Breakdown. But most of all, thanks to all you out there who listen and share and all the interaction on Twitter and all the fun we've had the last couple of days and all 12 games this year. It's been a much funner ride covering this Florida team compared to when I started the podcast. So just definitely the funnest season I've had covering the Gators, and glad I get to share it with so many of you out there and helping grow this podcast, help grow Gators Breakdown. And thanks to Will out there for joining me every week on here at his site, Reading Reaction. Bill, whenever he can, all the Gator panels. We'll have another Gator panel. I have to announce that later this week with all the guys from the last one: Silk, Nick De La Torre, Dan Thompson, Thomas Goldcamp, Tate Casey would join us as well. Graham Hall, everybody you expect to kind of be on this. We'll do another Gator panel. We'll have another episode with Will Miles on Monday here on Gators Breakdown. Get his thoughts of the FSU game. You can go and read his thoughts at Reading Reaction as well of his review, his film review of what the Gators were able to take advantage of for a 41-14 victory. Man, it feels good. Feels good to get this game off of our shoulders, off of our chest, and for these Gators to come out victorious and stop that 5-game losing streak to that school out west there. So I'm David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.